The bridge of the Resilience hummed with quiet tension. Captain Day-Wan stood at the command deck, his eyes fixed on the view screen where dozens of ships floated in formation. It was 2847, and humanity had only been part of the Galactic Coalition for 30 years. Most alien species still looked at humans like children playing with their parents' weapons. The patrol fleet hung in space near the Threshold Sector, a disputed region that bordered hostile territory. Day-Wan commanded the only human warship in a fleet of 20 Coalition vessels. The others belonged to the Taurine, the Morlani, the Vrex, and half a dozen other species who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years before humans even discovered fire. Lieutenant Hana sat at the weapons console, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. She was young but deadly efficient, the kind of officer who could calculate firing solutions faster than the ship's computer. Beside her station, Specialist Taemin monitored life support and medical systems. He was technically a combat medic, but on a warship, everyone had multiple jobs. Ambassador Yuri occupied a small station near the back of the bridge. She was supposed to be observing, learning Coalition protocols, sending reports back to Earth. Instead, she found herself holding her breath as the sensor alarms began to wail. The Vrelics had arrived. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a flash of distorted space, their ships ugly and brutal compared to the sleek Coalition designs. The Vrelics were raiders, pirates, scavengers who had terrorized the outer colonies for decades. They took what they wanted and killed anyone who resisted. The Coalition had been trying to stop them for 50 years with limited success. All ships maintain formation. The Coalition fleet commander's voice crackled over the communication channel. Admiral Vesh was a Taurine, a species known for their careful, methodical approach to everything. Engage at maximum range. Defensive Pattern 7. Remember the protocols. Day-Wan watched as the Coalition ship spread into a wide defensive sphere. It was a good formation, designed to minimize casualties and allow damaged ships to retreat while others covered them. It was the kind of strategy that made sense when you had been fighting wars for 10,000 years and had learned that survival mattered more than victory. The Vrelics opened fire first. Crimson energy bolts streaked across the darkness, slamming into Coalition shields. The fleet returned fire with measured precision. Each ship took turns shooting, calculated volleys designed to conserve energy and ammunition. It was warfare by mathematics, by probability, by ancient doctrine that said a battle should never cost more than it gained. Hana glanced at Day-Wan. "Captain, I have clear shots at their forward ships. Permission to engage?" "Hold position," Day-Wan said, though his jaw tightened. "We follow Coalition protocols." The battle continued for 20 minutes. The Coalition ships traded fire with the Vrelics at extreme range, their shields flickering under impact but holding strong. Then a Vrelics missile punched through the flagship's defenses. The explosion tore through 3 decks, killing hundreds of Taurine crew members in an instant. "Flagship is critical," Hana reported, her voice tight. "They're venting atmosphere." Day-Wan watched as escape pods began launching from the dying flagship, small capsules tumbling through space, each carrying survivors who hoped someone would pick them up before their air ran out. Coalition protocol was clear. When casualties exceeded 12%, you retreated. You regrouped. You came back with overwhelming force. "All ships, this is Admiral Vesh." The fleet commander's voice was strained, probably speaking from one of those escape pods. "General retreat. Fall back to Rally Point Delta. We will return with reinforcements." The Coalition ships immediately began turning away, their engines burning as they prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed. It was the smart move, the tactical move, the move that every military academy in the galaxy taught as standard procedure. Day-Wan watched the Vrelic ships moving toward the escape pods. He had seen this before in intelligence reports. The Vrelics didn't take prisoners. They would destroy those pods, kill everyone inside, just to send a message. "Captain," Hana said quietly, "Coalition is retreating." "I see them." Taemin's console showed life signs from 47 escape pods. 847 beings from 6 different species, floating helplessly while their fleet abandoned them. Following the rules. Following the protocols. Coming back in 3 weeks with enough ships to guarantee victory and finding nothing but debris and bodies. "Captain Day-Wan." Ambassador Yuri's voice came from behind him. "Coalition Command is ordering all ships to retreat." Day-Wan looked at the escape pods. He looked at the Vrelic ships moving to destroy them. He looked at his crew. Hana met his eyes and said nothing, but her hand hovered over the weapons controls. Taman pulled up rescue protocols on his screen, probably without even thinking about it. "Disconnect from Coalition Command Channel," Day One said. The communication officer hesitated. "Sir, you heard me, disconnect now." The channel went silent. Every eye on the bridge turned to their captain. Day One walked to the forward view screen and placed both hands on the railing. His knuckles went white. "Hana, charge all weapons. Redirect power from non-essential systems. I want every gun we have ready to fire." "Yes, sir." Her fingers flew across the controls. "Weapons hot. Taman, prepare for rapid rescue operations. I want those escape pods pulled aboard as fast as physically possible." "Understood, Captain." Taman was already coordinating with the small rescue teams scattered throughout the ship. "Helm, full burn. Take us straight into their formation." The pilot turned around, his face pale. "Sir, that's directly into hostile fire." "Coalition doctrine says." "I don't care what Coalition doctrine says." Day One's voice was cold and flat. "Those are people dying out there. We're not leaving them." The Resilience broke formation and accelerated toward the Vrelix fleet. Every other Coalition ship was jumping away to safety, but the single human vessel burned forward at maximum thrust, directly into the teeth of an enemy fleet that outnumbered them 5-1. On the Vrelix command ship, the tactical officer stared at his display in confusion. "Commander, one of the Coalition ships is not retreating." The Vrelix commander looked at the screen. A single small warship was accelerating toward them, while every other enemy vessel fled. "What species?" "Checking." "It's human, Commander." "Human?" The commander had barely heard of them. Some new species that joined the Coalition recently. Primitives who had just figured out faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. They must be confused. "Continue destroying the escape pods." But the Resilience didn't slow down. It came at them like a missile, like something launched with no guidance system and no off switch. The Vrelix ships opened fire, their weapons tracking the incoming target. The Resilience's shields lit up as energy bolts hammered into them. Damage reports started flooding the bridge. Shield strength dropped to 80%, then 70, then 60. Coalition doctrine said you retreated when shields hit 50%. Day One never even looked at the shield display. "Entering weapons range," Hana announced. "Targeting solutions locked." "Fire everything." The Resilience unleashed every weapon it had. Railgun rounds tore through space at a fraction of light speed. Missile pods emptied in rapid succession. Energy cannons that normally fired in careful intervals began continuous bombardment, their barrels heating beyond safe limits. A Vrelix destroyer took 3 railgun rounds to its reactor and exploded. Another ship lost its engines and began spinning out of control. The Resilience dove through the enemy formation, weaving between ships that were 10 times its size, firing at point-blank range where Coalition doctrine said no ship should ever operate. "Shield strength 30%. Someone called out. 25. "We need to retreat, Captain." "Keep firing." The Resilience positioned itself between the escape pods and the Vrelix fleet. Taman's rescue teams were pulling pods aboard as fast as the bay doors could cycle. Alien survivors stumbled into human corridors, confused and terrified, not understanding why one ship had stayed behind. Hana's console was screaming warnings. The weapons were overheating. Safety protocols were being violated across every system. She ignored all of it and kept shooting. A Vrelix cruiser tried to ram them. The pilot threw the Resilience into a roll that made the artificial gravity fail for 3 seconds. Everyone on the bridge grabbed onto something while the ship spun, narrowly avoiding the collision. The cruiser's shield scraped against theirs, both vessels losing power in a shower of sparks. "Hull breach on Deck 7, damage control reported. Fires on Deck 4. Life support is failing in sections B and C." Day One's voice never wavered. "Seal the breaches. Reroute life support. Keep those rescue teams working." The Vrelix fleet was in chaos. They had expected an easy victory, then an easier massacre of escape pods. Instead, they were fighting a single ship that refused to follow any logical pattern. It should have retreated 10 minutes ago. Its shields were nearly gone. Its hull was breached in multiple places. But it kept shooting, kept moving, kept pulling those escape pods to safety. "Last pod aboard," Taman finally announced. His voice shook with relief and exhaustion. "All survivors secured. Helm, get us out of here." Maximum burn. The Resilience turned and ran, its engines burning at dangerous levels. Orbital Station Meridian was the largest coalition military facility in the sector. Its massive rings rotated slowly in space, generating artificial gravity for the thousands of personnel who lived and worked inside. When the Resilience limped into docking range, every sensor operator on the station stopped what they were doing to stare. The human warship looked like it had been through a meat grinder. Hull plates were missing, scorch marks covered every surface. One of the main engines was completely dead, and the other was held together with emergency patches. By coalition standards, the ship should have been declared unsalvageable and stripped for parts, but it was still flying. Somehow, impossibly, it was still flying. Captain Day Wan stood in the docking bay as coalition security forces surrounded him. They were polite but firm, their weapons not quite pointed at him but ready. Behind him, his crew was already being separated and taken for questioning. Hana gave him a small nod as guards led her away. Taemin was still arguing that he needed to finish treating some of the rescued survivors. Ambassador Yuri walked beside Daewon as they moved through the station corridors. She was technically under arrest too, since she had been on the bridge during the incident. She kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing. She had sent an initial report to Earth, but even she wasn't sure how to explain what had happened. They put Daewon in a small room with a table and 2 chairs. It wasn't quite a prison cell, but it was close. A guard stood outside the door. Yuri was taken to a separate room nearby. For the next 6 hours, nothing happened. It was a standard coalition interrogation technique. Let the prisoner sit alone and think about what they had done. What Daewon thought about was his crew. Whether they would be punished along with him, whether the resilience would be taken away from them, whether humanity's reputation in the coalition would survive this. Finally, the door opened. Admiral Vesh entered, followed by 2 other coalition officers. The Taurine admiral was tall and thin, with gray skin and large dark eyes that showed no emotion. He sat down across from Daewon and placed a data tablet on the table. "Captain Daewon," Vesh said in his measured voice. "Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" "I do, sir. You violated direct orders from a superior officer during combat operations. You endangered your ship and crew by engaging a numerically superior force. You broke formation and communications protocol." Vesh counted each violation on his long fingers. By coalition military law, these actions warrant dishonorable discharge and possible imprisonment. Daewon said nothing. There was nothing to say. He had done exactly what Vesh described. However, Vesh continued, and something flickered in his large eyes. 847 coalition personnel are alive because of your actions, including myself. The escape pods you rescued contained crew members from 6 different species, 17 different worlds. All of them would be dead if you had followed orders. "Yes, sir." Vesh leaned back in his chair. "I do not understand you, Captain. Your ship was damaged beyond what our doctrine considers survivable combat levels. You should have retreated when your shields dropped below 50%. Instead, you continued advancing. Why?" "Because people were dying, sir. People die in war, Captain. That is the nature of combat. Not if I can stop it." Vesh stared at him for a long moment. "Your ship's damage reports show you operated with shield strength below 20% for 8 minutes. You redirected power from life support to weapons. You performed maneuvers at distances where a single error would have destroyed you. These are not rational combat decisions. They worked, sir. By chance. By impossible luck." Vesh's voice rose, slightly the first emotion Daewon had heard from him. "Do you understand that what you did violates everything we know about successful warfare? 10,000 years of combat doctrine, proven across 100 species, all says you should have died. But we didn't." In another room, Commander Bora was reviewing the Resilience's combat logs. Bora was human, one of the few who had risen to senior command in the coalition military. She had been called in specifically because of her expertise in human psychology. What she was reading made her deeply uncomfortable. The data showed everything Vesh had described and more. The Resilience had taken damage that should have forced an immediate retreat. Its crew had operated under conditions that would have incapacitated most coalition species. The weapons officer, Lieutenant Hana, had cycled through firing patterns at speeds that violated every safety protocol. The entire engagement was, by Coalition standards, completely insane, and it had worked perfectly. Bora pulled up historical data from human military operations. She had been avoiding this research, knowing what she would find. Now she had no choice. The patterns were undeniable. Human soldiers throughout history had consistently fought past the point where other species would surrender. Wounded humans continued fighting when they should have been unconscious from blood loss. Exhausted humans stayed awake for days during operations. Outnumbered human units chose death over retreat so often that they had special words for it. Last stands, fighting to the last man, going down swinging. It wasn't just bravery. Every species had brave individuals. This was something else, something built into human biology and psychology. Humans simply didn't know when they were beaten. Bora called in Dr. Kwan, a xenopsychologist who specialized in comparative species stress responses. He was a quiet human man who spent most of his time studying brain chemistry. He arrived carrying a thick folder of research. "Commander Bora," he greeted her. "I heard about the incident. I have been expecting this call." "You have?" Dr. Kwan sat down and opened his folder. "I have been studying human combat psychology since we joined the Coalition. I knew eventually something like this would happen. It was inevitable." "Explain." Dr. Kwan pulled out a chart showing brain chemistry comparisons across different species. "Every species we have studied has biological limiters on their stress response. When injury reaches critical levels, or exhaustion becomes dangerous, the body forces a shutdown. It is evolutionary survival. An injured animal that keeps fighting dies. An exhausted animal that does not rest dies. Natural selection favors those who know when to quit. But not humans? Humans had these limiters once, but somewhere in our evolution, we overrode them. Our ancestors were persistence hunters. We chased prey until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. We did not need to be faster or stronger. We just needed to never stop. The prey that survived were the ones that could outlast us. The humans who survived were the ones who could keep going longer than anything else alive." Bora felt cold. "So our entire species is biologically programmed to ignore our survival instincts." "In a manner of speaking, yes. We produce higher levels of adrenaline for longer periods with fewer side effects than any other known species. Our pain response decreases during combat stress instead of increasing. Our decision-making under pressure favors aggression over retreat. We are quite literally built for war in ways the Coalition has never encountered." Dr. Kwan pulled out another document. "I have been reviewing human military history. In every major human conflict, there are accounts of soldiers fighting with mortal wounds. Individuals holding positions against overwhelming odds. Entire units choosing death over surrender. The Coalition sees these as exceptional acts of heroism. For humans, they are simply Tuesday." Commander Bora looked at the research and felt something she had not felt since humanity joined the Coalition. She felt afraid. Not of aliens, of her own species. Back in the interrogation room, Admiral Vesh was still trying to understand. "Captain, I need you to explain something to me. When your shields dropped to 20%, what did you think would happen?" Day one considered the question. "I thought we might die. And yet you continued." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because 847 people would definitely die if we didn't." Vesh was silent for a moment. "That is not a rational calculation, Captain. You risked 300 lives to save 800, but your chances of success were less than 10%. Mathematically, you endangered more lives than you saved." "I'm not good at math, sir." It was not a joke, but Vesh's expression suggested he almost wished it was. "Captain Daywan, I am going to ask you a question, and I need an honest answer. When you charged into that Vrelix fleet, were you following some human doctrine I am not aware of? Some secret strategy your people have developed?" "No, sir." "Then what were you following?" Daywan thought about his crew, about Hana at her console, firing weapons beyond their safe limits, about Taemin coordinating rescues while the ship was actively being destroyed, about every member of his crew who stayed at their station when retreat was the rational choice. "We were just doing what needed to be done, sir." Vesh stood up abruptly. He paced the small room, his long frame tense. "You realize what you have done, Captain? You have shown the Coalition that humans do not follow our combat doctrine, not because you lack training, but because you are fundamentally different from us. Some species are calling your people dangerous. Others are calling you valuable. I am not sure which concerns me more. Daewon remained silent. There was nothing he could say to that. I am going to make a decision that may end my career, Vesh said finally. I am recommending all charges against you be dropped. You saved my life and the lives of hundreds of Coalition personnel. I cannot in good conscience punish that. But Captain, you must understand. Things are going to change. The Coalition is afraid of what you represent. What do we represent, sir? Vesh looked at him with those large, dark eyes. You represent a species that fights like berserkers but looks like diplomats. You are kind to prisoners, gentle with refugees, respectful to allies. But in combat you become something else, something we have no procedures for handling. The door opened and Ambassador Yuri was brought in. She looked tired but composed. Admiral, I have been in contact with Earth Command. They want to know if Captain Daewon will face charges. No charges, Vesh said. But there will be conditions. Over the next week, those conditions became clear. Captain Daewon was released, his crew given medals and commendations. The Resilience was repaired, though Coalition engineers kept muttering about how it had survived in the first place. But humanity's relationship with the Coalition had changed. New protocols were written. Human vessels would no longer be integrated into standard fleet formations. Instead, they were designated as asymmetric response units, special operations forces, the hammer you bring out when everything else has failed. It was a polite way of saying the Coalition was afraid to fight beside humans, but grateful to have them on their side. Daewon stood on the bridge of the newly repaired Resilience and looked at his crew. Hana was back at weapons. Taemin was at his medical station. They were ready for the next mission, whatever it might be. Ambassador Yuri approached him quietly. Captain, do you understand what happened here? We have been classified as a berserker species. They think we are crazy. Daewon looked at the stars outside the view screen. Somewhere out there, 847 beings were alive because his crew refused to quit. Let them think what they want, he said. We know who we are. But even he did not fully understand yet what it meant to be human in a galaxy where everyone else knew when to stop. The Coalition Science Council met in a chamber that floated in zero gravity, a neutral space where no species had home advantage. Representatives from 20 different worlds gathered, their bodies held in place by personal gravity fields. They had been called together to discuss a single topic that was causing concern across the entire galaxy: humans. Dr. Kwan floated at the center of the chamber, his presentation materials hovering around him in holographic displays. He looked small and nervous compared to the massive alien representatives, but his research was about to shake the foundations of everything the Coalition understood about warfare. Thank you for coming, Dr. Kwan began. I know many of you are busy, but what I have discovered requires immediate attention from the Council. A Morlani representative, her blue skin shimmering in the chamber's soft light, spoke first. Dr. Kwan, we have read your preliminary reports. Frankly, they are disturbing. You claim humans lack basic survival instincts? Not exactly, Dr. Kwan said carefully. Humans have survival instincts. We simply override them more easily than any other known species. He activated his first display. It showed brain scans from multiple species, color-coded to highlight different regions. Every species here has what we call a biological safety switch. When you are injured beyond a certain point, your brain forces shut down. You lose consciousness. You cannot continue fighting. This is not cowardice. It is biology keeping you alive. The representatives murmured among themselves. This was basic science known to every species for thousands of years. Humans have this switch too, Dr. Kwan continued. But ours operates differently. Our threshold is much higher. And more importantly, we can consciously override it. A human who is badly injured can choose to keep fighting through willpower alone. This should not be possible, but it is. A Vrex military commander leaned forward, his scales clicking together. You are saying humans can simply ignore pain? Not ignore. We feel pain as much as any species, but our response to pain during combat situations is suppressed. Our adrenaline response is stronger and lasts longer. Where your species might fight for 10 minutes before exhaustion forces retreat, humans can fight for hours, sometimes days. Dr. Kwan brought up historical records. Let me show you examples from human military history. These are not exceptional cases. These are typical. The first record showed an ancient human battle. This is from Earth, approximately 3,000 years ago. A force of 300 human soldiers held a mountain pass against an army of over 100,000. They fought for 3 days. When they finally fell, every single one was dead. They could have retreated. They chose not to. Suicide, the Morlani representative whispered. They committed mass suicide. They called it heroism, Dr. Kwan said quietly. And humans still tell stories about it. We teach our children that these soldiers were the best of us. He showed another record. This is more recent, from our early industrial age. A human soldier was found dead at his post, still holding his weapon. Medical examination showed he had been shot 7 times. Any one of those wounds should have incapacitated him. He fought for another 15 minutes before dying. The chamber was silent. Dr. Kwan could see fear in the eyes of the representatives. He continued, "This pattern repeats throughout all of human history, soldiers fighting with mortal wounds. Individuals holding positions alone against overwhelming force. Wounded humans carrying other wounded humans through active combat zones. By coalition standards, all of these behaviors are irrational. By human standards, they are what we call duty." Commander Bora had been invited to present military analysis. She floated forward, her expression grim. "I have reviewed every human military operation since we joined the coalition. Dr. Kwan's findings are confirmed by field data. Human units routinely operate at stress levels that would break any other coalition species." She displayed a combat report. "This is from a recent peacekeeping operation. A human squad was ambushed. They took 40% casualties in the first minute. Coalition doctrine says they should have immediately retreated. Instead, they counterattacked. All surviving members were wounded. They still won the engagement." "Impossible," the Virex commander said. 40% casualties should trigger complete unit collapse." "For your species, yes," Bora said. "For mine, it triggers rage." She showed another report. "This is medical data from human combat operations. On average, human soldiers continue fighting with injuries that would hospitalize coalition personnel for weeks. We have documented cases of humans fighting with broken bones, severe blood loss, and traumatic injuries that should have rendered them unconscious." A Taurine scientist spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. "You are describing berserker rage, uncontrolled violence. How can you be allowed in civilized space?" "That is the strange part," Dr. Kwan interjected. "Humans are not berserkers. Outside of combat, we are peaceful, cooperative, empathetic. We follow laws. We negotiate. We are gentle with children and care for our elderly. But when violence becomes necessary, we have this ability to become something else entirely." He pulled up psychological profiles. "We call it the switch. Most humans go their entire lives without ever activating it. But when it activates, when we decide that fighting is necessary, our entire biology changes. Pain response drops. Fatigue is ignored. Fear is suppressed. We become focused on a single goal, and we do not stop until we achieve it or die trying." "This is madness," the Morlani representative said. "Your entire species has a form of mental illness. Or," Dr. Kwan said carefully, "we evolved a survival strategy that works. Humans are not the strongest species. We are not the fastest. We do not have natural weapons or armor. What we have is persistence. We chase prey until it collapses. We fight enemies until they give up. We solve problems by simply refusing to quit. It has made us very successful on our home world." He showed population charts. Humans went from primitive hunters to spacefaring civilization in less than 10,000 years. We spread across our entire planet in a few thousand years. We survived ice ages, plagues, wars, natural disasters. We did not survive by being the toughest. We survived by outlasting everything that tried to kill us. The Vrex commander studied the data with calculating eyes. "This combat persistence, can it be trained? Can other species learn it?" "No," Commander Bora said flatly. "We have tried. The biology is not there. Your species have safety limits that cannot be overridden without severe psychological damage. Only humans have this combination of high pain tolerance, extended adrenaline response, and the ability to consciously choose to continue fighting past rational limits." "Then what do we do?" the Taurine scientist asked. "We cannot have a species in the coalition that does not follow basic survival doctrine." "We already have such a species," Dr. Kwan said. "Humans are here. We are part of the coalition. The question is not whether we belong, but how we integrate our capabilities with your protocols." A new figure floated forward. Warrant Officer Jinsol was a human Special Forces operative, and his presence made several representatives visibly nervous. He was compact and muscular, with scars that suggested he had seen serious combat. Dr. Kwan asked me to provide examples of human special operations, Jinsol said. His voice was calm and professional. I will be brief. Last year, my team was sent to rescue hostages from a pirate station. The mission called for stealth insertion. We were discovered immediately. Coalition protocol would have been to abort and return with larger force. What did you do? The Vrex commander asked. We went louder. Attacked from multiple directions. Made them think we were a much larger force. Created chaos. Jinsol's expression did not change. We sustained 60% casualties. We recovered all hostages. Mission success. 60% casualties is not success, the Morlani representative protested. That is catastrophic failure. All hostages survived, Jinsol repeated. That was the mission goal. We achieved it. At the cost of your own team. Jinsol looked at her directly. Yes, that is what soldiers do. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some representatives were horrified. Others were intrigued. The Vrex commander looked thoughtful. The Taurian scientist looked ill. Dr. Kwan raised his voice over the commotion. This is what I needed you to understand. Humans do not calculate acceptable casualties the way you do. We calculate mission success. If the mission requires sacrifice, we sacrifice. If the mission requires pushing past injury, we push. We do not do this because we are stupid or suicidal. We do this because 10,000 years of evolution has programmed us to believe that persistence wins. And does it? The Vrex commander asked. Does your persistence win battles? Commander Bora answered. Every military engagement involving human forces in the past 30 years has ended in coalition victory. Even when we were outnumbered, even when we were outgunned, we have never lost a battle where humans were allowed to fight without restriction. The implications hung in the air like a physical weight, a species that never retreated, that fought through injuries that should kill them. That viewed massive casualties as acceptable if the mission succeeded. The coalition had been building doctrine for 10,000 years based on survival and measured response. Humans played by completely different rules. What do you recommend? The Morlani representative asked finally. She sounded very tired. Dr. Kwan had prepared for this question. We need new protocols. Human forces should not be mixed with coalition units in standard formations. Our combat psychology is too different. It causes confusion and puts others at risk. But used correctly, as specialized response forces, humans can handle situations where coalition forces would fail. You mean suicide missions? The Taurian scientist said bluntly. I mean impossible missions, Dr. Kwan corrected. Situations where retreat is not an option. Rescue operations. Defensive stands. Any scenario where someone needs to hold the line no matter what. Humans excel at this. The Vrex commander nodded slowly. This makes strategic sense. But it requires acknowledging that one coalition species is fundamentally different from all others. We already are different, Commander Bora said. Pretending otherwise only causes problems. Better to acknowledge it and adapt. The council debated for 3 more hours. Finally, they reached a decision. Humans would be officially classified as an asymmetric warfare species. New doctrine would be written. Human forces would operate independently or in human-only units. Integration with other coalition forces would be limited and carefully managed. It was not the classification humanity had wanted when they joined the coalition 30 years ago. They had hoped to be equals, partners, friends. Instead, they were being labeled as the crazy species that did not know when to quit. But as Dr. Kwan floated in the chamber after the meeting ended, watching the representatives file out with worried expressions, he thought about Captain Daewon and the resilience. About 847 beings who were alive because humans did not follow protocols. Maybe being the species that did not know when to quit was not such a bad thing after all. Somewhere in coalition space, the Vrelics were about to learn this lesson the hard way. Because humans had just been given official permission to do what they did best. Fight until there was nothing left to fight with, and then fight with their bare hands anyway. The news spread through Vrelic's territory like fire through dry grass. A single human warship had devastated one of their attack wings. The warriors who survived told stories that sounded like madness. A ship that should have retreated but charged forward instead. Weapons that fired past their safe limits. a crew that fought while their vessel fell apart around them. The Vrelix War Council gathered in their command fortress, a massive structure built into an asteroid. They were a proud species, conquerors who had raided Coalition space for decades. They did not accept defeat, especially not from a species as young and weak as humans. They used some new weapon, one commander insisted, some chemical that makes them immune to pain. Or perhaps their ship has abilities we do not understand, another suggested. New technology we have not encountered. The War Council leader, a scarred veteran named Krull, slammed his fist on the table. It does not matter what tricks they used. What matters is we looked weak. We retreated from a single ship. Our reputation is damaged. We must respond with overwhelming force, the Council agreed. They would strike at human colonies, show the galaxy that the Vrelix were still the dominant power in the sector. They would hit a soft target, something that would break quickly and publicly, send a message that humans were not special, not feared, not anything but another weak species hiding behind Coalition protection. They chose New Jeju, a remote human colony with a population of 20,000. It had minimal defenses, just local militia, and some defensive satellites. Intelligence reports showed it would fall in less than a day against a proper Vrelix assault. The Vrelix sent 8,000 warriors, 20 warships, and enough firepower to level a city. They expected to land, overwhelm the defenders, and broadcast their victory across the galaxy within 48 hours. They were very wrong. Colony Defense Commander Seok stood in the command center of New Jeju's main settlement, looking at the tactical display. The red icons representing Vrelix ships outnumbered his defensive forces by a terrifying margin. He had 1,200 militia, civilians who trained on weekends and had never seen real combat. He had 3 small defense ships, 30 anti-air batteries, and whatever weapons the colonists could improvise. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "Coalition observers are requesting permission to evacuate. They say the colony is lost." Seok looked at the young officer. She was barely 20 years old, probably had dreams of going to university off-world, maybe becoming a doctor or engineer. Now she would likely die defending a farming colony against space pirates. "Tell the Coalition observers they are welcome to leave," Seok said. "Tell them we are staying." The communication went out. Within an hour, 3 Coalition observation ships departed, broadcasting their assessment that New Jeju would fall within 2 days. They offered to evacuate military personnel. Every single human soldier refused. Seok made his own broadcast, this time to the colony. "This is Commander Seok, the Vrelix are coming. They outnumber us 6-1. They have better weapons, better ships, better training. Coalition command says we cannot win." He paused, looking at the camera. Behind him, militia members were checking weapons, building barricades, preparing for a battle that every mathematical model said they would lose. "I am not ordering anyone to stay and fight. If you want to evacuate, civilian transports are leaving in 3 hours. You can go. No one will judge you. But if you stay, understand what that means. We are not defending until relief arrives. We are defending until the Vrelix leave or we are all dead. Those are the only 2 endings available." The transports left 3 hours later. They were empty except for children under 12 and their caretakers. Every other colonist stayed. Farmers armed themselves with hunting rifles. Engineers began building improvised explosives. The elderly organized supply lines and medical stations. Specialist Timon had been transferred to New Jeju 2 months ago. He stood in what would serve as the main hospital, a converted warehouse with hastily assembled medical equipment. He had 2 doctors, 4 nurses, and enough supplies for maybe 3 days of heavy casualties. "We should evacuate the hospital when the fighting starts," one of the nurses suggested. "Move to a safer location." Taman shook his head. "There is no safer location. We stay here. Wounded soldiers will need us, and they will need us close to the fighting. That is suicide. That is our job." The Vrelix landed on the 3rd day. Their dropships descended like a metal rain, disgorging warriors who immediately began their assault. They expected light resistance, maybe a few defensive positions that would crumble under sustained fire. Instead, they encountered a defense that made no tactical sense. Human militia held positions that should have been abandoned after the first barrage. Anti-air batteries kept firing even after Vrelix ships targeted them directly. Civilians with improvised weapons attacked from buildings, sewers, rooftops, anywhere they could find cover. The Vrelics took the outer settlements in 6 hours, but the cost was higher than expected. Human defenders did not retreat when positions became untenable. They fought from the rubble. When ammunition ran out, they used improvised explosives. When those ran out, they used whatever they could find. A Vrelics commander reported back to the fleet. The humans are not fighting tactically. They are fighting emotionally. They do not respond to intimidation or superiority of force. They simply keep fighting. Then kill them faster, came the response. But it was not that simple. The Vrelics had conquered dozens of worlds. They knew how species reacted to overwhelming force. First came defiance. Then came desperation. Finally came surrender. When casualties reached a point where continued resistance was irrational, humans seemed to skip the surrender part entirely. By the end of the first day, the Vrelics had taken 40% of the colony's territory. Their own casualties were minimal, maybe 200 warriors. The humans had lost 300 militia and twice that many civilians. By any rational calculation, the defense should be collapsing. Instead, it intensified. Commander Siok operated from a bunker that had been a school before the invasion. His command staff was down to 5 people. Communications were spotty. Half his defensive positions had been overrun. But the reports coming in showed something the Vrelics could not understand. Humans were not breaking. They were getting angrier. A farming community in the eastern sector had been surrounded. Instead of surrendering, they had flooded their fields with fuel and ignited it when Vrelics warriors tried to cross. 17 humans died in the fire. So did 67 Vrelics. A militia unit ran out of ammunition and charged a Vrelics position with farming tools and knives. It was suicide. It worked. The Vrelics warriors, confused by enemies who should have been retreating, panicked and fell back. Taemon's hospital was hit by artillery on day 4. The building partially collapsed. He moved operations to the basement and kept working. A nurse had died in the bombardment. One of the doctors had a broken arm. They treated wounded soldiers in the dark, using emergency lights and whatever medical supplies survived the blast. "We need to evacuate," the injured doctor insisted. The building could collapse completely. "Then we die here," Taemon said, stitching a wound on a soldier who had been shot 3 times and still insisted on returning to the front. "These people need us." A medic named Sujung had set up an aid station even closer to the fighting, in a bunker that was technically still an active combat zone. Artillery pounded the area constantly. She refused to leave. When someone asked her why, she said, "Because wounded soldiers cannot walk to a hospital. So the hospital comes to them." By day 8, the Vrelics War Council was receiving reports that made them question their intelligence. The colony should have fallen. Casualties were at 40%. Defenses were broken. Supplies were running low. Every model said the humans should have surrendered days ago. Instead, they had begun launching counterattacks. Small human teams were infiltrating Vrelics positions at night. They could not win battles, but they could cause chaos. A supply depot would explode. A communication relay would go silent. Sentries would disappear. The humans were losing the war, but refusing to accept it. "What is wrong with them?" a Vrelics commander demanded. "Do they not understand they have lost?" No one had an answer. On day 12, Commander Siok had 300 soldiers left. The colony was 90% occupied. They held only the central district, a few blocks of buildings that had been fortified into a final defensive position. He had no illusions about survival. They would all die here. He made one final broadcast to his troops. "We are not going to win. I want everyone to understand that. The Vrelics will take this colony, but they will remember what it cost them. They will remember that humans do not surrender. They will think twice before attacking another human world." A young militia member, barely 18, raised his hand. "Commander, why are we doing this? If we are going to die anyway, why not just surrender?" Sok looked at the young man. "Because 8,000 Vrelics are outside. If we surrender, they move on to the next colony. And the next? But if we make this so expensive that they decide human colonies are not worth the cost, then everyone we save justifies what we are about to do." The young man nodded slowly. He understood. They all understood. This was not about winning. This was about being so difficult to kill that the enemy decided to find easier targets. On day 14, something unexpected happened. The Vrelics stopped attacking. Their warriors held positions but did not advance. Their ships orbited but did not bombard. For 6 hours, nothing happened. Then a message came through. "This is Krull, War Council leader. We are withdrawing from New Jeju. You have made your point. Commander Seok stared at the message in disbelief. They are retreating? Sensors confirm, his tactical officer reported. Vrelic ships are leaving orbit. Ground forces are pulling back to their transports. Why? We are almost defeated. They could finish this in a day. But as the Vrelic ships departed, one of their commanders sent a final message. It was not official. It was personal. You are insane. Your entire species is insane. We cannot fight enemies who do not care if they die. We will not fight you again. The 16 days as it became known ended with New Jeju still in human hands. The colony was destroyed. 840 humans had died. But 8,000 Vrelics had spent 2 weeks trying to defeat 1,200 militia and failed. The word spread through the galaxy. Humans had held off a major Vrelics offensive with local militia. They had sustained casualties that should have broken any defense. They had fought past the point where surrender was the only logical option. And they had won by simply refusing to lose. Specialist Taemin walked through the ruins of New Jeju, helping search for survivors. His hospital had collapsed completely on day 15, but he had kept working in the rubble. Now he looked at the devastation and felt both pride and horror. A coalition observer approached him. The alien's face showed confusion and fear. Why did you stay? You could have evacuated. You are a medic, non-combatant. No one would have questioned your departure. Taemin looked at him tiredly. Because wounded soldiers needed me. But you nearly died. Many times. Yes. That is not rational. Taemin smiled, exhausted but genuine. Maybe not. But it is human. Across coalition space, military planners were updating their assessment of humanity. One species, the peaceful Morlani, formally requested that humans never establish colonies near their territory. Not out of anger. Out of fear. They sent a message to Earth that was both compliment and warning. You are the kindly ones who do not understand stopping. We respect you. We fear you. Please stay away. Humanity had proven something at New Jeju. They were not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the best equipped, but they were the only species that would fight a battle they knew they could not win, and somehow win it anyway, through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The courtroom was packed with representatives from 20 coalition species. Captain Daewon stood at the center, his uniform pressed and perfect, his face showing no emotion. Above him, a tribunal of 3 senior coalition judges reviewed the evidence from his court-martial one final time. The charges were clear. Violation of direct orders, reckless endangerment, breaking 17 articles of coalition military code. By the letter of the law, he should be dishonorably discharged and imprisoned. But the 847 beings he had saved filled half the courtroom. They came from 6 different species, 17 different worlds. They were alive because one human captain had refused to follow orders. The lead judge, a Taurian elder with centuries of experience, spoke carefully. Captain Daewon, this tribunal finds you, she paused, looking at the crowd, not guilty of all charges. You are hereby reinstated with full honors and promoted to fleet captain. The courtroom erupted in applause and protest simultaneously. Some species celebrated, others walked out in disgust. The divide was clear. Some saw Daewon as a hero. Others saw him as a dangerous example of human unpredictability. The verdict did not end the debate. It started it. Within weeks, the coalition command issued new protocols. Human vessels would no longer operate in standard fleet formations. They were designated as asymmetric response units. It was a polite military term that meant something simple. We cannot predict what humans will do in combat, so we will not integrate them with other forces. Some humans called it segregation. Others called it recognition of reality. Ambassador Yuri spent months negotiating what became known as the Restraint Accords, a treaty that tried to balance human military capability with coalition concerns. The terms were complicated, but the basic idea was simple. Humans agreed to accept observers on all military vessels. These observers, usually Taurine or Morlani, would monitor human decision-making during combat, and could recommend forced disengagement if human forces were operating beyond rational limits. In exchange, humans received special status. Coalition species would never invade human-held territory. Human cultural practices regarding valor and sacrifice would be recognized as legitimate, not pathological. Human military commanders would have more operational freedom than other coalition officers. The unspoken understanding was darker. Nobody wanted to fight humans on their own territory. New Jeju had proven what happened when humans defended their homes. Better to make peace and never test those defenses again. Dr. Kwan established the Institute for Human Combat Psychology at a coalition university. It became the most popular and most feared program in the school. Every species sent officers to learn about human warfare. What they learned disturbed them profoundly. Dr. Kwan taught classes on human military history. He showed footage of ancient human battles where soldiers fought with mortal wounds. He played recordings of human commanders giving orders that violated every coalition understanding of acceptable casualties. He explained concepts like Pyrrhic victory, where humans considered it acceptable to win at catastrophic cost. One day, a young Vrex officer raised his hand during a lecture. "Professor, I do not understand. You show us these examples of humans fighting past rational limits, but outside of combat, humans seem peaceful, even kind. How do you reconcile this?" Dr. Kwan smiled sadly. "That is the human paradox. We are capable of great violence and great compassion, often at the same time. A human soldier will fight to the death to protect strangers, then share his last food with enemy prisoners. We are complicated," the Vrex officer persisted. "But the violence, the refusal to surrender, is that not a sign of mental illness? By your standards, perhaps. By ours, it is heroism." Dr. Kwan pulled up a famous human saying. "We tell our children that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. We celebrate people who face impossible odds and try anyway. Your species would call that stupidity. We call it the best of humanity." Commander Bora took over the second half of the course, teaching practical applications of human combat psychology. She showed tactical simulations where human forces had succeeded against overwhelming odds. She explained how human unpredictability could be weaponized, how the willingness to accept casualties created strategic advantages. "Humans do not fight by your rules," she told her students. "We cannot. Our biology and psychology simply work differently, but this does not make us better or worse than you. Just different. The key is understanding when to use human forces and when not to." A Taurian officer asked the question everyone was thinking. "Commander, what do you tell your soldiers when a battle is truly unwinnable?" Bora did not hesitate. "We tell them the odds. Then we tell them to win anyway." The room fell silent. It was the most human answer imaginable. Acknowledge reality, then ignore it and push forward anyway. The restraint accords held for 5 years. Human forces operated mostly independently, taking on missions that other coalition species considered too dangerous. Hostage rescues, defensive stands, any situation where someone needed to hold the line regardless of cost. Humanity earned a reputation. They were the species you called when the mission was impossible, when casualties were guaranteed. When success required someone who did not know when to quit, then the Krethic swarm arrived. They came from outside coalition space, a hive mind species that had conquered 12 sectors through sheer numbers. The Krethics did not negotiate. They did not fear casualties. They simply overwhelmed every defense through endless waves of attackers. Coalition forces tried traditional tactics, measured responses, defensive formations, strategic retreats. Nothing worked. The Krethics did not care about losses. They could afford to lose 1,000 ships to destroy one coalition vessel. Traditional warfare could not stop an enemy that viewed its own forces as completely expendable. For the first time, the coalition formally requested human command of a major military operation. Not because humans had better technology or tactics, but because they were the only species that could match the Krethics' complete disregard for self-preservation. Fleet Admiral Daewon, promoted after years of successful operations, accepted command of coalition forces in the Krethics conflict. His first command meeting shocked every non-human officer present. "All pre-planned retreat points are canceled," Daewon announced. "We are not retreating. We will hold every position until the Krethics break, or we do." A Taurian admiral protested. "Admiral, that violates all coalition doctrine. We must have fallback positions." "Coalition doctrine does not work against the Krethics," Daewon said calmly. "They do not fear casualties. They cannot be intimidated. The only way to stop them is to be more stubborn than they are, and nobody is more stubborn than humans." He looked around the room at the assembled officers from a dozen different species. "I understand this makes you uncomfortable. I understand you think we are crazy. But you asked for human leadership. This is what that means. The battle against the Krethiks lasted 3 months. It was brutal, bloody, and violated every rule of civilized warfare. Human forces led every major engagement, absorbing casualties that would have broken any other coalition fleet. Warrant Officer Jinsol commanded boarding operations that coalition Marines called suicidal. His teams infiltrated Krethiks hive ships, fought through corridors filled with enemies, and planted explosives in reactor cores. The casualty rate was 70%. The mission success rate was 100%. Lieutenant Hana, now a captain, coordinated weapons fire from a flagship that sustained damage levels that should have forced evacuation multiple times. She kept her crew at their stations through sheer force of will, rotating personnel only when they literally collapsed from exhaustion. The coalition forces learned something during those 3 months. They learned what it looked like when humans truly committed to a fight. They saw human soldiers fighting with injuries that would kill other species. They saw human commanders making decisions that prioritized mission success over survival. They saw what it meant when an entire species decided that losing was not an option. The Krethiks broke first. Despite being a hive mind, despite having no individual fear, despite outnumbering coalition forces 3-1, they retreated. Because they encountered an enemy that fought exactly like them, species that treated individual lives as expendable resources, but did it with better tactics and unbreakable morale. The victory celebration was strange. Coalition species were grateful but uncomfortable. They had won, but the cost in human lives was staggering. Entire human battalions had been wiped out. Human casualties exceeded 40% across all operations. Any other coalition species would consider that a defeat regardless of the outcome. Humans considered it an acceptable price for victory. Specialist Taimin had been operating field hospitals throughout the campaign. When the war ended, he had been awake for 52 consecutive hours, treating wounded from 7 different species. A Morlani doctor approached him as he finally took a break. "I must ask you something," the Morlani said, her voice trembling slightly. "When you charged forward knowing you might die, when you kept fighting past your limits, did you know? Did you understand what you were doing?" Taimin looked up, exhausted but lucid. "Of course we knew. Then why? Because the job needed to be done. Because people needed help. Because someone had to." He smiled tiredly. "We are not stupid. We know when things are dangerous. We just decide it does not matter more than finishing the job." The Morlani doctor stared at him for a long moment. "You are all insane." "Maybe," Taimin agreed. "But we are alive. And so are you." Dr. Kwan updated his xenopsychological report on humanity. It became required reading at every coalition military academy. His conclusion was copied and distributed across the galaxy. Humanity represents the coalition's greatest asset and greatest existential concern. They are simultaneously our most valuable allies and our most troubling members. They are a species that evolved persistence hunting to its psychological extreme, bringing that same relentless determination to warfare, exploration, art, science, and diplomacy. Humans possess what other species would diagnose as a species-wide pathological inability to recognize when they have lost. This makes them invaluable allies and terrifying potential enemies. More concerning, they view this quality not as a mental illness but as a virtue to be celebrated and cultivated. They call it determination. We might call it controlled madness. They call people who exemplify it heroes. We have no word in coalition languages for beings who choose almost certain death over possible survival and consider it the correct choice. Perhaps human will suffice. 20 years after the Krethiks War, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy peace. Humans held a strange position in coalition society. They were respected, feared, valued, and kept at arm's length all at once. Human colonies were never attacked, not because of military might, but because nobody wanted to find out what happened when humans defended their homes. New Jeju had taught that lesson permanently. Human forces were called on only for the most desperate situations, when everything else had failed, when the mission was impossible, when someone needed to hold the line no matter the cost. Admiral Hana taught at the Coalition Military Academy, running classes on human combat doctrine. She was famous, decorated, and still slightly uncomfortable with how other species looked at her, like she was a weapon that might go off accidentally. One day, a young cadet from a peaceful species asked the question that everyone always asked. "Admiral, what do humans do when victory is mathematically impossible?" Hana had answered this question 1,000 times. It never got easier. We redefined victory and attack anyway. That is insane. Yes, Hana agreed. That is why it works. As the students filed out of the classroom, she overheard two alien cadets talking quietly. I am glad humans are on our side. The other responded, I am terrified they might not always be. Hana allowed herself a small smile. After 2 decades, the galaxy finally understood. Humans did not have a break during combat. They never had. They never would. It was not a flaw to be corrected. It was simply who they were. Somewhere in a distant sector, a new threat was emerging, some species that thought they could challenge Coalition space. They would learn what dozens of species had already learned. The Coalition would try diplomacy first. They would attempt negotiation. They would offer peace and hope for the best. But if that failed, they would call the humans. And the humans would come, not because they wanted war, not because they were violent, but because when someone needed help, when a line needed to be held, when a job needed to be done regardless of cost, there was only one species in the galaxy that would say yes without calculating the odds of survival first. In the end, that was what it meant to be human. Not the absence of fear, not immunity to pain, not some special weapon or technology, just the simple, stubborn, slightly crazy refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was the only logical option. The galaxy had learned to live with that, some species with gratitude, some with fear, all with respect. Because humans had proven something that could not be unproven. Sometimes the species that does not know when to quit is exactly the species you need, and sometimes courage is not about being fearless. It is about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. The knowledge that impossible just meant nobody had been stubborn enough yet. And humans were very, very stubborn.